Welcome to today's American Community Media Briefing. I'm Sandy Close, ACOM Director, and your moderator for today. Our topic is about California's unprecedented special election on November 4th. New congressional districts are on the ballot, as well as the balance of power in Congress. This election is all about representation. President Trump ignited a mid-decade redistricting battle, demanding new congressional maps in Texas to favor the Republican Party ahead of next year's midterms. Now, California is attempting to counterbalance this move through new maps proposed in the upcoming special election. Nonpartisan voting rights experts from Common Cause will detail what this special election means for California, the key information voters need to know, and how voters can find nonpartisan help making their voices heard at the polls. We welcome our panel. We begin with Darius Kemp, who will talk about the role Common Cause has played in redistricting reform in California and its ongoing commitment to promoting fair representation in the state. Welcome, Mr. Kemp. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Darius Kemp. I am the new Executive Director for California Common Cause. Common Cause is the People's Lobby, a nonpartisan democracy reform and voting rights organization that has members in every congressional district in the nation. We're here today to discuss the November 4th special election, which is all about redistricting and representation. We care deeply about this because we know that redistricting is more than just lines on a map. Fair maps mean fair representation, fair votes, and a fair future for everyone. As an organization, we have fought for fair maps all the way to the Supreme Court and brought an independent redistricting commission to California, which is the gold standard for redistricting across the nation. California Common Cause has been leading the way for decades to make sure that our state's redistricting processes are transparent and representative. Like I just mentioned, in 2008, we helped end partisan gerrymandering in the state of California's on their legislative lines. And in 2010, we did the same for congressional lines here in the state of California by establishing the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. The California Citizens Commission ensures voters, not politicians, come first. Because democracy matters at all levels of government, we have successfully enacted similar reforms for fair, impartial, and representative redistricting at the local level as well. Most recently, passing measures DD and LL in Los Angeles, establishing an independent commission for the city and the LA Unified School Districts. During the 2020 local redistricting cycle, we developed resources to educate community groups, local jurisdictions, and members of the public about the processes. We watchdogged redistricting in over 60 cities, counties, and school boards. Our work focused on empowering communities to make their voices heard, which led to more public involvement in fairer and more equitable redistricting processes at both the local and the state level throughout California. We recognize that we're at an extraordinary moment in our democracy, and everything is unfolding at lightning speeds. Today, my colleagues, Dan and Brittany, will discuss how we got here, what this special election means for Californians, and the key information that voters need to know. So thank you all for being here, and happy to answer any initial questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Mr. Fantini, with Hispanic LA, can you start off our questions?
Yes, thank you, Sandy. My question is looking at the big picture. Of course, I mean, here we have this Proposition 50 that obviously it's going to be very important in terms of what's going to happen in Congress. But on the other hand, I mean, looking at the big picture and talking about the Voting Rights Act, I mean, why is the Supreme Court's upcoming decision in Louisiana versus Calais so important for making sure everyone's vote counts fairly? And how could it affect minority communities' ability to choose leaders who represent them under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act?
Yeah, this is a really great question, and I'm going to actually let our senior director Dan, who is works with our national partners. He's on our national team, and Dan has a lot, and also works with our litigation team as well. And so I think Dan will have a lot of insight here.
Dan, why don't you address that question now, even if it's also part of what you'll be presenting?
Sure, happy to. So for decades, the Voting Rights Act has been a key pillar of America's effort to ensure racial justice and racial equity and equal access to the ballot for all people in the United States. And a specific area of that, about 40 years ago or so, the U.S. Supreme Court interpreted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to require, under certain circumstances, the drawing of legislative districts that would allow people of color, communities of color, to elect their preferred candidates, right? If you had a community that was large enough to make up a majority of a kind of normally shaped district, that community voted largely the same way, that the white majority tended to vote against their preferred candidate, it created circumstances in which a map-making body was required to draw a district that would allow that community to elect their preferred candidates, and it's made significant strides toward ensuring that communities across the country could actually have representation in the halls of power. Now, just yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case, Louisiana v. Calais, that seeks to undermine that important protection that's empowered communities of color for so long. It seeks a decision from the Supreme Court that would eliminate any use of race in the drawing of districts, and you could see a complete wipeout of Black, Latino, Asian representation in Congress and state legislatures, city councils. It would just make a huge difference. It would be absolutely devastating. And you saw some of the conservative justices suggest that it was time to eliminate those important protections from a Voting Rights Act that they have already gutted over the last 15 years. So, usually those decisions come out at near the end of the term in June, maybe kind of even the end of June for the most controversial, difficult ones. So we'll wait and see how it goes, but it's a big threat to Voting Rights Act protections.
And let's go to a second question. Araceli Martinez with La Opinión. Do you want to ask your question?
Thank you for the opportunity. I was wondering if you have some polling that show us about what can we expect for the election on November 4? Do you think that this proposition will pass?
Mr. Kemp.
Yeah, just so you know, we're a nonpartisan organization, so we're not currently doing or normally do any polling on, issues like this in this way. Our goal is to make sure that voters have all the fair and balanced information they need in order to make an informed decision. I will say, though, we have done polling. Specifically, we polled over 2,000 Americans, 500 of which here in the state of California, and also 500 in the state of Texas, and other states as well, that ask voters about the importance of redistricting. And what I can say is that this fight, this issue around mid-decade redistricting that started with Trump asking Texas to find more votes, that led to Governor Gavin Newsom presenting Prop 50 in quick succession. I can say that our polling shows that Californians, as well as a majority of Americans, see the importance of redistricting. They believe that voters should pick their elected officials and not elected officials picking their voters. Even a majority of Republicans in California believe that redistricting is important for our democracy, not to mention a majority of Democrats and a majority of independents. So it's very clear that polling, I cannot say, we do not have any polling, and I cannot say how people are feeling about Prop 50 in terms of its likelihood of passing or not passing. But what I can say is that people are very much understand the importance of redistricting and understand that redistricting is something that is a core factor of determining if we have a fair and free and open and a representative democracy. I'm also going to kind of open it up to either Brittany or Dan that might have any additional comments here on this.
Thank you. We're going to move now to your formal presentation, Mr. Vicuña. Thank you for accommodating the questions.
As mentioned earlier, Prop 50 would adopt a new U.S. House map for California. It's going to be used in the elections from 2026 until 2030. If voters approve Prop 50 on November 4th, the map specified in AB 604 would take effect for California's U.S. House districts starting in 2026. After the 2030 census, Redistricting Authority will return back to the Citizens Redistricting Commission under existing law. So Prop 50, if passed, would affect only U.S. House districts, so it wouldn't touch state assembly or state senate districts. It's going to be time limited. The Prop 50 map is going to end after the 2030 census, and after 2030, the power to draw districts will return to the Citizens Redistricting Commission. So where did Prop 50 come from? As I kind of alluded to earlier, in July of this year, President Donald Trump's Department of Justice sent a letter to Texas political leaders demanding that the state dismantle congressional voting districts designed to empower communities of color to elect candidates of their choice. Trump also sought to flip 5 of the state's congressional districts from Democratic to Republican control. California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a plan to respond to Texas's attack on voting rights by redrawing the state's congressional map to flip 5 Republican districts to Democratic control in advance of the 2026 midterm elections. In August, the California legislature passed a legislative package that called for a November 4th, 2025 special election in which voters will be asked to adopt the new state congressional map that aims to achieve this goal. So if passed, Prop 50 would create new district boundaries that would be adopted for California's U.S. House representation. The new map, like I mentioned, would be in effect starting in the 2026 elections. Where does California Common Cause and where does Common Cause stand on Prop 50? California Common Cause is not opposing Prop 50. We decided to evaluate any mid-decade redistricting against our fairness criteria. Those criteria focus on proportionality, public participation, racial equity, time limits, and support for federal and independent redistricting reforms. And we determined that Prop 50 meets those standards, so we would not oppose. Digging into the fairness criteria that we developed a little bit. Common Cause's position follows decades of advocacy against partisan gerrymandering, including taking Common Cause v. Rucho to the U.S. Supreme Court, drafting provisions in the Freedom to Vote Act to ban partisan gerrymandering, and championing independent commissions nationwide. We oppose gerrymandering on principle, no matter who does it. However, we also recognize that this is a complicated and critical moment for our democracy, and voters have the right to make informed decisions about how their elections work. This is no longer one state game in the system. It's a national power grab designed to make Donald Trump unaccountable to voters in a midterm election he's afraid of. Our fairness criteria provide a framework to determine how we'll use our limited time and resources, given the many challenges to democracy our country is facing. If a mid-decade redraw meets the criteria, we will not oppose it. We evaluate maps according to, as I mentioned, proportionality, which means that any mid-decade redistricting responding to Trump's effort should be a targeted response proportional to the threat posed by mid-decade gerrymanders in other states. Public participation is a criterion. Any redistricting must include meaningful public participation, whether through a vote of the people or open public processes. Racial equity. Redistricting must not further racial discrimination or dilute the political voice of Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and other communities of color. Federal reform. Leaders pursuing mid-decade redistricting must publicly endorse the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, including provisions banning mid-decade redistricting and partisan gerrymandering. So another element of the fairness criteria is endorsement of independent redistricting. Leaders pursuing mid-decade redistricting must publicly endorse a neutral, fair redistricting system, such as citizen-led independent redistricting commissions as the long-term solution. And finally, a time limitation. Any new redistricting maps must expire following the 2030 census, which counts all people in our country, and be replaced through the regular decennial redistricting process. And in places with reform measures, those reform measures must be reinstated in the next redistricting cycle. President Trump is pressuring states like Texas to redraw maps mid-decade for raw partisan gain. It's not isolated, as I mentioned. It's a coordinated effort to silence dissent and manipulate the midterms before a single vote is cast. In addition to Texas, as I was describing, Missouri has already done a redraw. North Carolina has announced it will redraw an already gerrymandered map. Florida, Indiana, and Kansas are also considering special sessions to waste taxpayer dollars for a mid-decade redraw. So California's proposal passed our fairness criteria because it wasn't about entrenching one party. It was about protecting checks and balances in a moment of democratic crisis. As I described, there are other threats as well to voting rights that we're watching carefully. Louisiana, the Calais case, and the importance of protecting Section 2. This really isn't about lines on a map. It's about whether our government remains accountable to the people or becomes a tool of authoritarian control. Mid-decade redistricting done in bad faith undermines democracy by letting politicians choose their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. When voters lose their voice, entire communities lose access to fair representation on healthcare, education, jobs, public safety, and many other crucial issues. This is a democracy stress test. Either voters remain the ultimate check on power, or politicians manipulate the rules to make themselves untouchable. We're fighting to make sure voters still have the final say.
Now we'll go to Brittany Stonecipher, who is the Voting Rights and Redistricting Program Manager for California Common Cause. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sandy. So first, California is an incredibly diverse state, yet our voter turnout does not represent that. The California electorate is usually whiter, wealthier, and older than the actual population of California. According to U.S. Census estimates, white people make up 41% of California's adult population, yet they comprise 55% of the state's likely voters. Latinos, on the other hand, represent 35% of the adult population, but account for only 21% of those most likely to vote. Asian Americans comprise 15% of the adult population, but only 14% of likely voters. In recent years, California has made significant improvements to voter access and turnout. However, our state still has a long way to go in addressing voter participation disparities.
Ms. Stonecipher, let me just remind you, speak slowly. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. During the 2024 general election, overall eligible voter turnout was 62%. However, for Latino voters, it was 46%, and for Asian American voters, it was 54%. These disparities have been persistent across elections. Adding to the urgency of this moment, turnout is often lowest during off-cycle and special elections, and turnout disparities are typically greater during these elections. That is why our election protection and voter engagement program is critical. It helps support all eligible voters so the electorate is reflective of the actual population. While in many ways, California is a leader in protecting the rights of voters, we still need to ensure that higher voter participation is representing everyone, especially voters of color. Being heard and fairly represented starts by showing up at the ballot box. That's why every election year, including this one, California Common Cause mobilizes and trains nonpartisan election protection volunteers to serve as the voters' first line of defense against obstacles to the ballot box and to ensure elections officials and poll workers are complying with the terms of state law. Our trained nonpartisan volunteers protect California voters against electioneering and intimidation, confusing rules, outdated infrastructure, misinformation, and needless obstacles to the ballot box. We encourage voters who need assistance to call or text 866 Our Vote, which I'll mention again at the end, 866 Our Vote. This hotline is available in multiple languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Bengali, Hindi, Urdu, and Tagalog. California Common Cause will have poll monitors in certain areas of Southern California, and we will be monitoring hotline calls and developments across the entire state. Voters can also find resources at commoncause.org/voteca. So just to go through some of the information that voters need in this election, in addition to conducting on-the-ground poll monitoring and statewide election protection, Common Cause will also be working to close voter disparities by ensuring that all Californians have accurate, easy to understand information about how to participate in this election. So let's go through some of the most important information that voters need. First, to vote in statewide elections in California, a person must be a U.S. citizen, a resident of California, at least 18 years old on election day, and not currently serving a prison sentence or found mentally incompetent to vote. Although voters must be 18 or older on election day, in California, 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote. Most Californians with a criminal record have the right to vote, which is a common misconception that people are always prohibited from voting with a conviction. That is not true. The only time a conviction affects the right to vote in California is while an individual is serving a state or federal prison sentence. Californians who are unhoused and meet the eligibility criteria described before also have the right to vote. Voting registration is required before an eligible voter can cast a ballot in California. It's important to make sure that registration is up to date to receive a correct ballot in time for the election. If a person has moved, changed their name, or regained the right to vote since they last voted, they need to update their registration. Voters can also update language preferences when updating their voter registration, which can allow them to receive a ballot and other election materials in the language they feel most comfortable voting. For the November 4th special election, voters can register or update their registration online or by mail until Monday, October 25th. If voters miss that deadline, they can use same-day registration to register or update their registration in person at a vote center or polling place until the close of polls on Election Day. Finally, when it comes to voting, Californians have multiple ways to cast their ballot. The first option is by mail. All voters with active registration will automatically be mailed a ballot. This ballot can be returned through USPS in the ballot envelope provided. There's no postage required. Mailed ballots must be postmarked by November 4th, but we highly recommend mailing them no later than Halloween to ensure that they are received in time. Another way that voters can return their ballot is by returning them to an official ballot drop box anywhere across the state. In many counties, this is likely to be the fastest way to return a ballot that's received by mail. Finally, if preferred or needed, voting locations will be open in every county on November 4th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., and voters can vote in person. There's also early in-person voting options available now, and more locations will open across the state starting October 25th. When voting in person, voters who need language access assistance can ask poll workers what materials they have available in their preferred language. Bilingual poll workers will have name tags identifying the languages they speak. If a voter's preferred language is not available in a particular voting location, poll workers can help the voter access the Secretary of State's hotline, which is staffed with bilingual poll workers covering 10 languages. Voters should also know that they do not have to show ID to vote in a state election in California. Although poll workers may ask for ID to make it easier to find the voter in the poll books, it is not mandatory to have one. Finally, for in-person voters, if you are in line when polls close at 8 p.m. on Election Day, you have the right to vote, and voters should stay in line. However voters choose to cast their ballot, we encourage them to sign up on the Secretary of State's website to track their ballot so they are notified when their ballot is received or counted. And again, if voters run into any questions or challenges on Election Day anywhere across the state, they can call 866-OUR-VOTE. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have more questions, but we have run out of time. But I would say you've helped open the door to what we know and what we don't know and what we need to know about the November 4th election. Thank you so much, Common Cause. Thank you to our interpreters. Now our conference is closed.